Hello, and welcome to the 26th episode of my Failed Franchises Rail Operators series, as well as the 4th episode of my Welsh Operators mini-series. Today is part 2 of my Arriva Trains Wales episode, to ensure that you've watched part 1 before watching this. In today's video, we'll look at the latter years of Arriva Trains Wales, their handover to Transport for Wales, and whether or not they should be deemed as a failure overall. Do like, subscribe, and consider joining the channel for exclusive perks if you enjoy this video. Thank you. We start in 2017. Arriva Trains Wales has already been operating for 14 years and, in the past few years, have been coming under pressure by passengers for an ageing rolling stock, strikes and overcrowding, which I focused on in the first episode. For Arriva though, these problems would only intensify during their final few years of operations. The company was featured in a BBC Wales programme titled Week In, Week Out in 2017, which saw the company slammed for extremely high profits and extremely high overcrowding in the Cardiff area, with overcrowding rising at a faster rate than anywhere else outside of London. Arriva Trains Wales' managing director was also grilled by local MPs in Cardiff regarding the poor performance of the company. The high passenger numbers, an 11 million increase from 2003 to 2016, had led to huge profit for the company and huge overcrowding. Arriva hit back and suggested that they operated 20% more services than was contractually required and had invested £32.5 million in the network since 2003. Arriva was also slated for their facilitation of events held in Cardiff, such as the Six Nations and 2016 Rugby World Cup. Arriva forced 70,000 fans to wait queuing outside the station in the pouring rain for hours. However, they were praised for their customer service and people management on event days, despite the intense overcrowding. Arriva also stabbed at Network Rail and their delays in electrification projects across the UK, suggesting that this had led to a huge diesel stock shortage, which is by no means incorrect. Arriva were operating the UK's oldest rolling stock by average age, with their original contract not facilitating any new rolling stock. To try and combat this lack of rolling stock, Arriva Trains Wales even at one point considered using local haul trains to haul Class 442 Wessex Electric units. Services on the Ebb Vale line were so unreliable that most services arrived at least half an hour delayed. Network Rail only invested 1% of its annual budget in Wales, despite the country being home to 6% of all rail infrastructure. 2017 was by far the worst year for Arriva Trains Wales and their operations. With just a year left on their contract, they didn't have any real interest in upgrading their rolling stock or investing in the service. In September 2017, YouTuber Stuart Thomas, who had over 10,000 subscribers at the time, reviewed Arriva Trains Wales on his Stu's Reviews series. In the episode, he looked at the intense overcrowding and poor fleet conditions in and around Cardiff. Stuart himself had been affected by Arriva, with him commuting from Mountain Ash Station to university each day. In the review, he even caught a passenger fainting. Stuart highlighted how he hoped the next franchise would help change things on the network, with new stock being introduced. Later in 2017, Arriva were put in the firing line for giving commuters ridiculous penalty fares, such as a passenger who was fined £615 for a £1.90 ticket as they were unable to purchase a ticket prior to boarding. On the topic of commuting, Arriva reported that since 2013 there had been a rise of 250,000 commuters within Cardiff, whilst receiving very little additional stock to support this increase. Ageing pacer trains and Class 150 sprinters were by no means fit for purpose on high-density commuter lines, with the pacers being rightfully discredited for their poor accessibility and ride quality. Passengers described Arriva's services around Cardiff as absolutely horrendous and utterly shambolic. Another commuter suggested that it was only a matter of time before there was a serious accident from the overcrowding, with another one highlighting how every day he was packed in the train like kettle, with little breathing room. Arriva once again used their contract as an excuse, suggesting that the contract had been poorly written, with no leeway for growing its fleet, as well as the fact that Arriva had completed several modernisation schemes and had refurbished all their rolling stock, going above and beyond their contract. However, with sky-high profits, Arriva's slander was perhaps justified. In January, a committee of MPs suggested that there was an urgent need for new trains in Wales, with many problems due to the high failure of the franchising process back in 2003, with passenger numbers increasing by 75% since the contract was written. Committee chairman, Conservative Monmouth MP David Davis, said the decision to let the 2003 franchise on the basis that there would be no growth in rail usage was a huge mistake. It has meant that the investment that might have been expected has not been made, and rail users have endured the consequences of this. Often, this has meant not being able to get a seat, or that the trains have been dirty. Arriva themselves suggested that they were working with the government, but there were no easy answers to the situation in the short term, with the new franchise in 2018 being the earliest point for new stock to be discussed. Regarding this new franchise, which would include the new South Wales Metro project, Abellio, Arriva, Keolis Amy and MTR all bid for the new franchise, which would be awarded in 2018. In May 2017, Arriva upgraded their Cardiff timetable to enable 127 more trains to run, with 600 extra seats into Cardiff per day, but suggested storms, such as Storm Eileen, had sent them back with disruption. Arriva also blamed Network Rail engineering overruns, which led to some stock being unable to leave depots across the network. Arriva did, however, acknowledge the uncomfortable conditions on their trains. However, 83% of passengers were satisfied with the service, despite having poor value for money and poor punctuality, according to a Transport Focus survey in 2017. In October 2017, Welsh rail passengers were greeted by good news. Arriva had decided to drop out of the running for the new contract in 2018. They stated that it wasn't an easy decision, and they were proud to have provided services in Wales since 2003. Wrexham MP Ian Lucas suggested that few tears would be shed, with him highlighting how Wales needed an imaginative new franchise holder to enable the South Wales Metro vision to be fulfilled. Arriva pulled out of the new franchise for their own commercial reasons, with Arriva themselves unsure whether they would be able to fulfil the procurement process administration whilst running two other companies, Chiltern and Cross Country. Keolis Amy eventually won the new franchise and promised 148 brand new trains on the network by 2023, with most of the rolling stock entirely replaced by 2024 under the Transport for Wales brand name. However, after this announcement, Arriva were put in some good light for the first time in several years. The company finished 2017 as the UK's most reliable operator, with 273,000 services arriving on time, 82.8% across the year. Arriva also increased the number of services in Wales to over 1,000 a day each weekday, the highest since the 1960s. Despite a positive end to 2017, figures for 2018 were less kind to Arriva. In January, figures saw that only 79% of passengers were satisfied with Arriva's service, just 7% higher than Southern, who were considered the worst operator in the UK at the time. Just 54% deemed Arriva Trains Wales value for money, 7% lower than 2016. Also, only 57% were content at overcrowding levels, compared to 91% at Virgin Trains West Coast. A month later, Arriva suspended a large number of its long-distance services after all 27 Class 175s were taken out of service over severe wheel damage. The majority of services between North Wales, West Wales and along the marches around Shrewsbury were suspended. This hugely affected passengers for several days and led to a surge in complaints, a 30% rise. New figures released by the Office of Rail and Road for 2017 and 18 showed Arriva had 66 complaints per 100,000 journeys made, with punctuality and overcrowding the most common reasons for these complaints. This figure made Arriva the sixth most complained about operator in Great Britain, with the company one of the worst in responding to complaints within the 20-day industry period standard. Bruce Williamson of Rail Future said that there was no excuse for the poor replies, suggesting that, with some of the problems we've been experiencing on the railway, the train operating companies can, with some legitimacy, pass the buck and say it's someone else's fault. But when it comes to basic customer service, like replying to complaints, that's totally within Arriva's hands, and there's no excuse for that. Arriva themselves hit back at the report, suggesting that they were third in the UK for customer service satisfaction and seventh for the amount of praise received. An Arriva survey found that 80% were happy with the levels of punctuality and 70% were happy with the levels of overcrowding. However, only 43% of passengers were happy with the outcome of their complaint. Barry Lloyd, head of customer service at Arriva, suggested that poor weather and a lack of available diesel rolling stock in the UK had led to the surge in complaints, with the new £5 billion Transport for Wales franchise and the 148 new trains by 2023 hopefully being able to fix some of these issues. The main income for Arriva Trains Wales was ticket sales, which had risen from £60 million in 2004 to over double that at £142 million in 2017, partly due to a 4.5% rise in rail fares each year. Another negative before Arriva handed over their franchise was how they dealt with lost wallets. Before September 2018, any wallets lost on Arriva's services were not handed out freely to their owners once found. Instead, Arriva charged the owners £2 per wallet, plus pocketing 10% of any cash inside. The policy was only reversed after it got social media presence on Twitter, with one tweet reaching nearly 1,000 likes on the topic. Just before Arriva ceased operations, their annual figures were released in terms of profits, with the franchise overall raising £173 million of profits to the Arriva UK group since 2004, with profits rising from £6 million in 2004 to £27 million by 2017, with Arriva paying huge dividends to parent company Deutsche Bahn, whilst also fueling the claims that Arriva were making too much profit. There would, however, be some positive news before Arriva ceased operations, with full details of the South Wales Metro project announced. £5 billion would be spent on a new all-Wales operator to fund over 140 brand new trains, which would include the replacement of 95% of the Arriva Trains Wales fleet. There would be major upgrades to the core Valley Line route within Cardiff and upgrades to other local commuter routes around the city centre, with a turn-up-and-go metro-style service being implemented across the core Valley lines, with new diesel and electric stock providing a much-needed capacity boost to services across the Wales and Borders franchise. However, these upgrades would have to wait until at least 2023, and definitely not under Arriva Trains Wales. As for Arriva Trains Wales, well, they would have little relevance in Wales as a rail operator, as on the 14th of October 2017, Arriva handed over all operations to the new Transport for Wales franchise run by Keolis Amy. In its 15 years of operations, Arriva had been through many lows, usually overcrowding, striking and lack of rolling stock. However, the company, with support from Network Rail, the government and EU funding, did progress with a lot of their promises and more. Arriva did help complete several projects, such as major redesigns of Newport, Swansea, Bridgend and Port Talbot stations, and refurbishments at Llanelli, Shrewsbury and Colwyn Bay, all in 2018 alone. The addition of step-free access at 13 stations, 168 stations receiving new information screens, 45 new station shelters, hundreds of ticket machines, car parking spaces and secure cycle storage, new stations at Fishguard and Goodwick, and Eglin and Churchill Park, and Llanhaven, a second platform installed at Garreton, the £100 million investment and reopening of the Ebb Vale line and the Glamorgan line, as well as a full refurbishment of their whole fleet, including the Class 142s, 150s, 153s, 158s and 175s, as well as introduction of local hauled stock. From where Arriva Trains Wales began, they had come a long way and achieved a lot. Although services were overcrowded and often delayed, some of those services wouldn't have run without Arriva, and it showed how successful privatisation had been in growing passenger numbers. Arriva also achieved perhaps their main aim, linking Wales. They had successfully created a united Welsh rail network under a successful singular brand, increasing services across the nation. Professors of transport at the University of South Wales were surprised that Arriva did so well, managing to run a mostly reliable and intense service with ageing rolling stock. For some, they were sad to see Arriva go. For many, though, it was a chance to trust rail again under a new operator. This was confirmed when many people celebrated the new Transport for Wales franchise. A party was held at Cardiff Central, for example. The new franchise promised to replace all of their fleet with brand new trains, which would see the Pacers fully replaced by 2020. However, as we'll see in the coming episodes, a certain global pandemic put a stop to Keolis Amy's ambitions. So, in conclusion, should Arriva Trains Wales be deemed as a failure? Well, in my opinion, probably yes, but it's not all down to Arriva, so hear me out. The 2003 franchise itself was written out terribly and did not have any leeway in terms of passenger growth. The growth of passenger numbers across the UK rail network is one of the few positives that privatisation has brought us, but when it is not expected and forecasted in long contracts, such as in Arriva Trains Wales' case, it proves to be disastrous. The lack of any extra or more modern diesel rolling stock proved to be Arriva's downfall, with overcrowding and poor punctuality the mainstay across the 14 years in operation. However, Arriva's constant excuses or blaming of others did seem pretty unprofessional and slightly naive. Regardless of this, they did succeed at their franchise requirements, such as promoting the Welsh language on services and refurbishing their rolling stock. Arriva improved service frequencies, such as on the Cambrian coastline, and had pretty consistent high results for satisfaction from passengers. However, strikes, overcrowding, huge profits for Arriva with little return to passengers, and lacklustre customer service is why I would say that they are a failure overall. But what do you think? Am I being way too harsh on Arriva Trains Wales, or were they better than I perhaps suggested? Do let me know in the comments below, and if you remember any eventful or interesting journeys you may have had on them. Thanks for watching this 4th episode of my Welsh Operators mini-series, and I hope you enjoyed this remaster of my Arriva Trains Wales video. Special thanks to my first class members Callum Martin Bell, Crispin Mickey and John Williams, as well as my business zone members Andrew Bowen, Anthony Harris, Anthony James Moore, ARK, Connor Grieg, Craig Mitchell 43, Gordon Walker, Jay Teco, Lewis C21, NJTE and That Transport Girl. Get your name on this list from as little as £2.99 a month and help me to make my videos, as well as getting some cool perks. I really do appreciate it, so thank you. Also, thanks to everyone that let me use their footage for today's video. You can find their channels in the description or pinned comment below. Once again, thanks for watching. Check out my Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram and Discord server below, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.